Folks, who rules the world? Who rules the world? Now, the standard answer that a Marxist will give you is the capitalist class, those who own the means of production. And they are correct. But how do those who own the means of production, own the major centers of wealth and power, how do they go about exercising their rule of the world? And obviously, not all of them own the world equally. Some capitalists are left out. Other capitalists have far more influence. There are struggles among the bourgeoisie. So, how is it that figures within the ruling class exercise their power? Who really has the influence? Who really has the power? Well, folks, in theory, power lies with politicians, with heads of state, with government officials. Right? In theory, the government has a monopoly on force. Right? The government can kill you, the government can seize your property, the government can do things that individuals cannot do. Right? If you go out and rob somebody, that's a crime. If the government does it, they call that taxation. If you go out and kill somebody, that's a crime. If the government does it through their processes, that's called the death penalty. And if they do it extra legally, if it's a police officer, they call it justifiable homicide. The state has a monopoly on armed force, and the state tends to be led by figures that we call politicians. But how is it that politicians are guided in order to do the will of the rich and powerful? How is it that they make sure that politicians do as they are told and serve those who serve wealth? This is an important question. And it really gets down to the fact that political leaders never are simply themselves. You don't have political leaders that are just people, I'm on here, right? No one's telling me what to say on here. I do my own research. I do my own reading. I do my own analysis. No one's telling me what to say. I just come on here and do that. That's not how it works for presidents. That's not how it worked for kings. That's not how it works for prime ministers and heads of state. They're constantly surrounded by people, right? And those people that they are surrounded by influence them and tell them about the world and craft them and push them to act in certain ways. The power behind the throne is far more influential than the throne itself. The throne is a symbolic office, a symbolic power. But at the end of the day, it's the people behind the throne, the advisors, the people whispering into the ear of powerful people. They are the ones that really determine how things get going. And those folks are carefully crafted. You can talk about the Trilateral Commission during the 1970s, how the Rockefeller family, the oil banking dynasty that I talk about in my book, Oil and the Capitalist Crisis, they worked very, very hard to develop a whole crew of people who would whisper into the ear of politicians and heads of state to get them to do what was in the interests of the Rockefellers, right? You can talk about all kinds of think tanks and apparatuses that have been created. But there's a whole history of this, going back thousands of years, right? The Roman emperors were constantly surrounded by soothsayers. Soothsayers were people that would predict the future by giving these kind of poems or prophecies. And there's a story of the Emperor Tiberius in Rome, and he decided that he wanted to consult soothsayers. He needed a new soothsayer. But he knew that a lot of the soothsayers that were walking around Rome claiming that they could predict the future, that they were fakes. And so he got all the soothsayers he could have and took them to an island. Took them to an island with a big cliff, on the edge of the cliff. And he lined up all the soothsayers. One soothsayer would come up to him, and he would say, "Tell me the future. Tell me my future." And if the guy started speaking, and he didn't like what he said, he'd grab him and throw him off the cliff. And this happened. The story goes that Emperor Tiberius of ancient Rome was standing by the cliff, and different soothsayers would come up, start predicting the future. He thought they were full of baloney. He thought they were full of malarkey. He thought they were feeding him a line of bullshit. So he would throw them off the cliff. And then the story goes that one soothsayer walked up to Emperor Tiberius, and he said to him, okay, after having thrown a number of previous soothsayers off the cliff, he said to them, tell me my future. And the soothsayer says, I cannot. And he says, what do you mean you can't? And he says, my vision, my prophetic vision, is clouded by the fact that I am in great danger of losing my life. And the Emperor Tiberius looked at him and said, I like this guy. He'll be my soothsayer. Kind of an ironic story, but that's how things have gone. There have always been people whispering into the ears of kings, whispering into the ears of politicians, advising them, driving them, giving them influence. And those people are very, very carefully selected by the rich and powerful, right? If you are a wealthy person, you want someone who's in your pocket whispering into the ear of the president, whispering into the ear of the king. If you're the owner of a big bank, if you're the owner of a giant oil corporation. However, occasionally you will have wise leaders who will look past their advisors and take action, mobilize the public. You know, they talk about Julius Caesar being a populare or a populist. Great book here by Michael Parenti, right? The Assassination of Julius Caesar, A People's History of Ancient Rome. One of the greatest studies of ancient Rome, showing how Julius Caesar stood up to the rich and powerful and fought for the Roman proletarians and took all kinds of progressive moves. An amazing book by Michael Parenti. I quoted extensively in City Builders and Vandals in our age. But, you know, yes, occasionally you will have leaders who will align themselves with mass movements, etc. But generally, the way societies that are divided into classes, with a ruling class, are structured, you have one group of people whispering, you know, you have a group of people that surround the politician, the king, the emperor, the president, the prime minister, whispering into his ear or her ear, telling them the way events should go, crafting their views. There's a long history of this. Now, you know, one great example, when I was a child in Sunday school, we always learned the story of Daniel in the lion's den. There was this ancient Israelite named Daniel, and he was thrown into the lion's den, but God sent an angel to close the mouth of the lions, we were told, and he was saved. And then, of course, that story always accompanies the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? 3 Israelites who were thrown into a fiery furnace. But again, the story is that, you know, an angel came and protected them from the flames. But they never really, when we were learning this story as kids in Sunday school class, they never really told us why it was that Daniel was being thrown into the lion's den, or why it was that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were being thrown into the fiery furnace. Well, this was in Babylon, and Daniel was an advisor to the king, and he was listening to the king's dreams, advising the king what to do, claiming to have mystical powers and mystical insights. And of course, the other soothsayers and fortune tellers and such, the other sorcerers and others who were advising the king, were jealous of Daniel because they saw him becoming more and more influential over the king. And that's the story goes, right? Or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the same story. The other soothsayers and fortune tellers became very jealous. This is a long story of how do you influence those who hold the official seat of political power. How do you do it? How do you drive those that have the official seat of political power? How do you craft them? How do you craft their worldview? How do you drive them to do things? Now, probably one of the most successful attempts at doing this was the Oracle of Delphi. It's very interesting, right? You can learn about ancient Greece, you can learn about ancient Rome, you can learn about antiquity, and never hear about the Oracle at Delphi, right? You hear it referenced. Oh, there was this place called Delphi, and there was a temple there. Not important. The Oracle at Delphi was probably one of the most influential institutions in the known world at that time. Probably one of the most influential institutions for at least 800 years. 800 years, the Oracle at Delphi existed. Now, what was the Oracle at Delphi? Well, the Oracle at Delphi, it was this temple, right? It was this temple that existed on this island called Delphi. And it was in a temple to the god Apollo. And at this temple, there was a priesthood of men, educated men, scholars. And they would work at the temple, they would maintain it, and they would find a woman. And they would have this woman. They called her the Pythia. And the Pythia was said to be getting messages from divinity, mystical messages from the god Apollo. This woman was called the Oracle or the Pythia. And they would get this woman, and they would feed her certain foods, they would burn certain incenses, and they would get her into a kind of hypnotic trance state. And she would start to babble incoherently, blah, 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 speaking in tongues or whatever. And the priesthood of the temple at Delphi claimed they could translate what she was saying. So from all over the ancient world, Athens, Sparta, Rome, Carthage, Persia, kings, emperors would come to the temple at Delphi for advice. And they would come to the temple, and they would have to present lots and lots of gold and treasury. Right? Lots of treasure was handed over to these priests. And then they would proceed to ask the Pythia what they wanted to do. Should I invade this country? Should I send my wealth here? Should I build roads in this province or in this province? And of course, they would get the woman, the Pythia, and they would set her out there. She would be sitting there, and they would feed her these foods and, burn the incense, and she would go, and then the priests would come, and they would give them a poem, like a rhyming poem that would be an answer to their question. But it would be very unclear. It wouldn't be a direct answer to their question. And all of these ancient kings, all of these ancient emperors, they paid a lot of attention to what the Oracle at Delphi was saying. What was interesting about the whole thing was that what the temple at Delphi was really doing was setting up basically an influence peddling institution. Because when all these kings and emperors would come, they would chat them up and get information from them. It was an intelligence operation. It was an information gathering operation. All these world leaders would come to the temple, and they would get their information from them, and they would compile all that information. Furthermore, they built up quite a bit of treasure. The treasury of Athens, they talk about. A lot of treasure was accumulated at the temple at Delphi, the Oracle at Delphi. So they started lending money. It became a bank. A bank, right? The temple at Delphi was also lending lots of gold and money to different kingdoms and having kingdoms become in debt to them. And it was really the priesthood. It was the men who conveniently could interpret what the oracle was saying. They really had the power. Right? She was just babbling incoherently, and they would say, well, what she's saying is, and they would cover themselves. For example, there's a story of one king went to the temple at Delphi, asked the Pythia, should I go to war? Should I go to war and attack this kingdom? And the oracle responded that if you go and attack this kingdom, if you go to war, you shall destroy a great kingdom. If you go to war, you will destroy a great kingdom. And he said, great, okay, I'm going to go to war and I'm going to destroy this great kingdom. Well, he lost the war. So he was furious, right? The oracle got it wrong. No. The great kingdom that you destroyed was your own. Aha. Right? It was a very, very careful, very, very careful operation. gathering intelligence and information all throughout the Mediterranean region, gathering and accumulating gold and wealth and lending it, carefully whispering into the ears of all the great kings and leaders, and carefully trying to advance your own agenda. That's what the temple at Delphi was. It was an ancient think tank, essentially. It was an ancient council on foreign relations. It was an ancient Ford Foundation. It was an ancient Asia Society. It was essentially a giant global think tank, carefully gathering information and whispering into the ears of rich and powerful people to push its own agenda. And the amount of power and influence it had was far greater. We hear about great leaders from the ancient world, but at the end of the day, the priesthood of Delphi probably wielded far more power than any of these individual kings. And the priesthood at Delphi was very key in transitioning the world toward the domination of Rome, right? You remember there was Athens, there was Sparta, there were the Greeks fighting the Persians, there was Carthage that was fighting Rome, and the Oracle at Delphi never blatantly took sides, right? They had to maintain their illusion of objectivity, right? They had to present the idea that they were taking no sides, they were just getting messages from divinity, from the gods, they were just predicting the future, but they liked the Romans. The priesthood of Delphi liked the Romans. Something about the Roman Empire they liked. And so they made a decision to carefully push the world into the hands of the Roman Empire. And it worked. I mean, it took a long time. The number of years that the temple at Delphi was in existence and exercising its influence over the Mediterranean, what was it then, at that point known as the known world, was 8 centuries, 800 years, almost a millennium. For almost a millennium, the most powerful institution in the world was a hoax. It was all a big hoax. I mean, it was a hoax. Come on, do you think that this woman that they found was really getting messages from God? Do you think that these priests could really, translate incoherent babblings? It was all a big hustle. It was all a big scam. It was all fake. But it was a way to peddle influence. And it was a way to gain wealth and power. And it was a way that a well-established group of people could influence the world and push the world toward the way they wanted. And they wanted the Roman Empire. They liked the Roman Empire. Now, why they liked the Roman Empire, you can only speculate about. But Plutarch, for example, one of the greatest Roman historians, had been part of the priesthood, was part of the priesthood of the Temple of Delphi. One of the craziest stories that just shows you how ridiculous the entire thing was, one of the greatest stories about the Temple of Delphi, is that when they started the Oracle at Delphi, the woman, the priestess, the Pythia, that they called her, they decided it had to be a virgin. It had to be a young virgin who was pure, had never had sex, and was beautiful. And so that's how they started it out. But then they had a little bit of a problem. Why? Because of the fact that one king came to the temple at Delphi, went before the Pythia to get his vision, and fell in love with her. He said, she's just so beautiful. So he took out his sword, and he and his soldiers took the priestess away. So after that, the priesthood, the priesthood of the temple at Delphi got together, and they decided, okay, from now on, the woman who is the priestess has to be over 50 years old and not good looking. I kid you not. I mean, it was a scam. It was a hustle. But it was a way that this brotherhood, this priesthood, could accumulate lots of wealth for themselves by becoming the central bankers, by lending money all throughout the ancient world. Number 2, it was a way that they could gather all kinds of information. And number 3, it's a way that they could push the world toward what they wanted. And what they wanted was the Roman Empire. right? They saw the Roman Empire rising, and they nudged the world closer and closer. They never blatantly took sides. They never announced to the world, we are on the side of the Romans. No, they just kind of nudged the world toward Rome's rule. It's fascinating, but essentially, what the priesthood of Delphi was doing was not that different than what the ruling class of today does in order to maintain its power. Not that different at all. It's really the same thing, right? They cultivate leaders with their think tanks. They have these leaders, these academics, these big brains, whisper into the ears of the politicians who we get to vote for, and policy is enacted. Look into who some of these people are who are now whispering into the ears of our leaders. It's far more important, I would argue, to know who's whispering into the ears of the president, who created them, why they created them, what they want. Far more important than to know who the president is and where their life story came from, right? A lot is written about the life of Barack Obama. A lot is written about the life of Donald Trump. A lot is written about the life of George W. Bush and Bill Clinton and such. But the people whispering into the ear of Barack Obama, Ben Rhodes, for example, was one of the key people in writing Obama's speeches and crafting Obama's policies. Right? Understanding Ben Rhodes and who's behind Ben Rhodes is far more important than really understanding Barack Obama. Understanding Steve Bannon is also far more important than understanding Donald Trump. Understanding Peter Navarro, right? Why is Donald Trump waging this crazy trade war with China? Right? Is it Donald Trump just really, he looked at the facts for himself? No. It has been arranged that one of Donald Trump's chief advisors, one of the people whispering into Donald Trump's ear about the trade war with China, is Peter Navarro. And who is Peter Navarro? Peter Navarro is a hack. He's a phony, right? He is an academic who has dedicated his life to demonizing the People's Republic of China. He has done nothing his whole life but make, little documentaries, go around giving lectures, anything, writing books. China equals bad. That's all this man does. And his ideas are not taken seriously by any other economists. Whether they're libertarian economists, he tends to hang out with the libertarian Austrian school free market crowd. Whether they're Keynesian economists, nobody takes Peter Navarro seriously. He's a hack. He's a phony. But people who don't like China pay him. They pay for his work, basically. And, there's a lot of people who don't like China, right? A lot of American businesses don't like Chinese businesses competing with them. The owners of Apple do not like the fact that the biggest telecommunications manufacturer in the world is Huawei Technologies. American steel corporations don't like the fact that China produces half of the steel in the world today. American copper corporations don't like the fact that China produces half of the copper in the world. China is producing like crazy. They have an industrial powerhouse. They are a booming center of global production. And the capitalists who once had a monopoly, the Western monopolist corporations, don't like China. And so a lot of money has been put into cultivating Peter Navarro. And what does Peter Navarro do? He comes up and he churns out garbage that other economists look at and giggle and laugh. But it's well-paid work, right? It's slick. He's got a big production budget because it's what a lot of people want to hear. And so now he's on the White House Trade Council. And he's telling Donald Trump, fight China. Oh, China is responsible for all of America's economic woes. Oh, COVID-19 is a secret Chinese bioweapon. I mean, there's no proof of that, but whatever. He is Peter Navarro, an economic hack, a flim-flam man, a phony, who's been cultivated to whisper into Trump's ear, is pushing this stupid trade war. It's the same thing that happened in the ancient world. But if you really want to dig into this, if you really, really want to dig into this, right, it's the same on the liberal side as on the conservative side. Probably one of the most influential people during what you can call the late Cold War period in the United States, probably the individual who's the most responsible for the overthrow and fall of the Soviet Union, is Zbigniew Brzezinski. And who is Zbigniew Brzezinski? Zbigniew Brzezinski, born in Poland, moved to Canada, eventually moved to the United States. Zbigniew Brzezinski. He went up through Harvard and Columbia University, through the Cold War University, became one of the strategists that was key in fighting against communism around the world. After the disaster of the Vietnam War, there was a feeling that the military-industrial complex and the strategy of having big, giant wars that blow things up with massive bombing campaigns, that wasn't going to work. The United States was handed a very humiliating defeat at the hands of the Vietnamese people, right? And nothing like that had ever happened. I mean, you can talk about the Korean War. I guess the Korean War was similar, where the United States was forced back to the 38th parallel by the Korean people. But Vietnam was an even more humiliating defeat than Korea. Right? The people of Vietnam, peasants, people living in small huts and villages, hiding rifles under their beds, defeated the army of the United States, the biggest military in the world. Thank you, Mitch. I appreciate it. The United States was defeated at the hands of the Vietnamese people. In fact, 2/3 of the fighters in the Vietnamese National Liberation Front army were women. Right? The U.S. assumed that only men would fight in the military, so they started, rounding up and holding and detaining Vietnamese men and all of that. But it was the women of Vietnam that largely did the bulk of the fighting against the United States in the Vietnam War. The United States was humiliated in its defeat in Vietnam. And so, the strategic side of U.S. foreign policy, the side of U.S. foreign policy that doesn't favor big dramatic explosions, massive bombing campaigns like Nixon's Rolling Thunder that killed millions of people in North Vietnam, but instead the side of U.S. foreign policy that favors strategic manipulation, the use of intelligence agencies, started to get the upper hand. And the Rockefellers, they said, this is Brzezinski's time. The Rockefeller family decided that Brzezinski was their man. They also liked Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski did not like each other. That's a whole nother story. But Henry Kissinger was wildly influential as well. But Kissinger and Brzezinski became the forces that the Rockefeller family and the Eastern establishment, the wing of U.S. capital that is probably the most powerful and influential, the big oil companies, right? Standard Oil was started by John D. Rockefeller. Today it's known as ExxonMobil. Chase Bank is their banking institution, together with J.P. Morgan. That faction picked out Zbigniew Brzezinski and Henry Kissinger to be their forces, to be their people. Right? There's the Trilateral Commission, which was a very, very big think tank they developed. And Brzezinski was right on top of it. And Jimmy Carter became president in 1976. Jimmy Carter said that he was a student of Zbigniew Brzezinski. And Zbigniew Brzezinski, his idea was that you needed to manipulate communists against each other. Manipulate the communists in the Soviet Union against the communists in China. Manipulate the communists in Vietnam against the communists in Cambodia. Manipulate the communists of Poland against the communists in the Soviet Union. Manipulate the communists in Yugoslavia against the Soviet Union, right? Brzezinski, his family were Polish nationalists, Roman Catholic. They had a long-standing hatred for Russia. Right? There's thousands of years of tension between the people of Poland and the people of Russia. And he had almost, I would say that Brzezinski had an ethnic hatred for Russians. I mean, if you read his grand chessboard, if you look at his life story, his obsession, it wasn't about communism, it wasn't about politics. He hated Russians. He was a Polish nationalist and Roman Catholic, and he did not like those Russian Orthodox Russians. I mean, it was a long-standing geopolitical dispute. Brzezinski had the idea of fomenting Islamic insurgencies against the Soviet Union. That was actually a strategy that he developed, right? The use of the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. He brags about it. He uses the term Afghan trap to describe how he lured the Soviet Union, forced the Soviet Union into a situation where it needed to send troops to Afghanistan, and then recruited Osama bin Laden and a whole army of Wahhabi extremist fanatics to go to Afghanistan to fight against the People's Democratic Republic, right? And the idea was eventually to spread this insurgency throughout the entire southern USSR. It's very, very wild. Very, very wild story. Very, very wild story. That's Zbigniew Brzezinski. His daughter is now on Morning Joe, right? One of the most important talk shows on MSNBC with Joe Scarborough. Right? That is power behind the throne. The Rockefeller family, the wealthy oil banking dynasty, exercising their influence. Same story. Same story if you look at what was going on with Henry Kissinger. His background, the Rockefellers crafted him, trained him, brought him up there, gave him huge cash gifts his whole life. Henry Kissinger was very much a brain, an advisor, a voice whispering in the ears of politicians and political leaders working for the Rockefeller family. Like, there's a whole history of this. In our world today, you can talk about Cass Sunstein. Right? Who's Cass Sunstein? He was an advisor in the Obama White House. He's married to Samantha Power, who was also an advisor in the Obama White House and went on to become the UN ambassador under Obama. And they pushed Obama like crazy to invade Libya, to carry out the NATO military intervention in Libya. And one of the things they told Barack Obama that he had to send troops to Libya. He had to send cruise missiles to Libya, because when Gaddafi said he was going to retake a certain city, he said he was going to go house to house to fight the insurgents. Now, what does that mean? That means he's going to find who these anti-government rebels are. He's going to search houses. He's going to go house to house and find them. However, the crafters of U.S. foreign policy, the people in the back room whispering into the ear of Barack Obama, Samantha Power, Cass Sunstein, the Hillary Clinton State Department, they told Barack Obama that house to house meant that Gaddafi and the Islamic Socialist government of Libya was going to exterminate everyone in the city, that they were going to commit genocide. House to house means they're going to go from home to home and kill everyone. That's what they told Obama. It wasn't true. It wasn't true. Gaddafi had no intention of committing genocide. But regardless, that's what they told Barack Obama. And Barack Obama didn't want to sit back, and he got on TV and he said, oh, well, there's going to be a genocide. We have to intervene. He claimed he prevented a genocide. We now know that's a big fat lie, right? We also know Susan Rice, who was the UN ambassador at the time, I believe, was telling everyone that Gaddafi was distributing Viagra all over the country so that his soldiers could rape women. That turned out to be a big fat lie as well. But I'm sure that Barack Obama was told this. I'm sure that Hillary Clinton was told this. That powerful people, wealthy people, arranged for their puppets, for their surrogates, to be in the back room whispering into the ears of elected officials. This is how the game is played. Right? The decisions are made by elected officials, perhaps, but they make them based on the information that they are given. They make their decision based on what the people in the back room are whispering to them. And that's why the struggle to be the power behind the throne is so important. In my book on Kamala Harris, I talk a lot about the Hillary Clinton State Department. Right? A lot has come out since Barack Obama left office. We now know a lot more about what was going on in the back room of the Obama White House. We know a lot about it. What we do know is that Barack Obama did not want to be an interventionist president, that he believed in soft power. What Obama wanted to do is he wanted to trade with Cuba, and he wanted to sign the Iran deal, right? That's what Obama wanted to do. He didn't want to escalate military interventions. But that some kind of deal was made. You'll remember that the Democratic primary in 2008, it was Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama, and it was very, very, very close. Some kind of deal was made, and Hillary Clinton became Secretary of State, and Barack Obama became president. What we also know is that early on in the Obama presidency, there were protests going on in Iran against the election. After Ahmadinejad had been re-elected in Iran, there were protests taking place against Ahmadinejad in Iran. And someone from the Hillary Clinton State Department by the name of Jared Andrew Cohen, who worked in Hillary Clinton's State Department, was a former employee of Google Alphabet, which is now known as Jigsaw, I believe, went to Twitter, the owners of Twitter, on behalf of the U.S. State Department, and told them to not shut down their operations and to stay intact so that Twitter could effectively facilitate the protests and the destabilization of Iran. This is according to an article in The New Yorker. Jared Andrew Cohen, representing the Hillary Clinton State Department, went to Twitter to try and convince them, and successfully convince them, to help stage and destabilize Iran. Barack Obama heard about this and tried to fire Jared Andrew Cohen, but Hillary Clinton protected him. Hillary Clinton protected him. We also know that Anne Marie Slaughter, who was in the Hillary Clinton State Department, she is very much a student of Zbigniew Brzezinski. She talks about global chessboards. She wrote a book called The New World Order, which was about the fall of the Soviet Union and the role of the United Nations. Right? Samantha Power boasts about how important responsibility to protect is. Right? They've added to the UN Charter this phrase, R2P, responsibility to protect, that overrules national sovereignty. Right? If they declare that someone is violating human rights or engaging in genocide, the national sovereignty of the country is overturned. Right? The right of the country to have its sovereign ways is overturned because the international community has a, quote, responsibility to protect. And it was responsibility to protect that was invoked in Libya, that was invoked many times regarding Syria. It's been invoked many, many times to try and justify and make it legal under the UN Charter for the United States to overthrow governments it does not like. Right? Now, conveniently, there's no responsibility to protect the Yemenis. You don't see the U.S. military and the UN troops flowing into Yemen to protect it from the Saudis. There's no responsibility to protect them. Right? There's no responsibility to protect the people of Honduras from the drug-infested narco regime the United States installed in Honduras in 2009, overthrowing Manuel Zelaya, the rightfully elected president. There's no responsibility to protect the people of Guatemala from a similar, U.S.-backed up criminal, corrupt regime. However, responsibility to protect is applied as a convenient way for the sovereignty of independent countries to be violated when accusations of crimes against humanity or human rights violations are being hurled by international media. There's also the International Criminal Court, the ICC. Right? This is an institution that was established that, first of all, Donald Trump and before him George W. Bush basically declared that the United States has no right to abide by its rules. But furthermore, it's an institution that seems to only go after African leaders. Right? Look at the number of people that have been tried by the ICC. See if you can find one that was not African. Right? Now, there was the International Criminal Tribunal on Yugoslavia that was like a precursor to the International Criminal Court. Those folks were not African, obviously. Those were Yugoslavian folks. But the ICC has a particular fixation with Africa and going after African leaders and intervening in Africa's affairs, which is quite interesting because Africa, as we know, has lots of oil. It's got lots of very, very, very valuable minerals that are very key in making computer technology. It's got lots of natural gas. It's got a very big population, and it's very underdeveloped. And if Africa were to raise its head, if Africa were to do what China has done, Could you imagine how much the world would shake? The world has already shaken because China stood up. With socialism, China has gone from being one of the poorest countries in the world to being a global superpower with socialism. And that's China. Imagine what Africa would do if the millions and millions of people in Africa took control of their resources, took control of their economies, and started constructing. Could you imagine how beautiful that would be? Could you imagine how much that would change the world? Global relations would change. If Africa were no longer being subject to imperialism and being kept in chronic poverty by Wall Street, it would be such a game changer in the global situation. But it seems like the ICC, the International Criminal Court, has been set up explicitly for the purpose of making sure that never happens. And that faction that was in the Hillary Clinton State Department, they particularly hated Gaddafi, a great African leader, an African leader who was pushing for an independent African currency, who built the world's largest irrigation system, the Great Man-Made River, was talking about bringing Africa together, right? And African sovereignty. I mean, think about it. Think about it, right? That same faction that backed the Hillary Clinton State Department, that backs the International Criminal Court, they particularly don't want to see Africa raise its head. There's a very good book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, by Walter Rodney, where he talks about the history of colonialism and imperialism, how Africa is not naturally poor. And Africa, we have this myth that the people of Africa were just, living in caves or whatever until the slave ships showed up. That's a big lie. There's been civilization in Africa. There's been science in Africa. The state and the conditions of the African people are the result of Western capitalism and colonialism and imperialism. That is the reality. But beyond that, folks, do you remember when Barack Obama went to South Africa and basically spelled it all out there and said that if everyone on this continent had air conditioning and a house and a car, it would destroy Mother Earth, and basically told the African continent that it's in Mother Earth's interest to keep you all poor? Do you remember that? You remember that? The Malthusianism that came from the lips of Barack Obama when he was speaking to the people of Africa. I mean, this is all linked together, folks. It's all tied together, right? The world is ruled by big banks and corporations, by a small group of very, very wealthy people who realize that if they are going to stay rich, the world must stay poor. And this is the reality of what imperialism is. Read Lenin's book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. The rise of international monopolies, right? The rise of financial cartels, carving out spheres of influence in order to keep the world poor. And right now, they're desperate to maximize their profits. They don't need us at the assembly line anymore. With the computer revolution, they don't need workers like they once did. And so they are desperate to reduce the human population, desperate to drive down living standards. They've decided that the only way we could possibly deal with global warming, the only way we can deal with it is to reduce human consumption, right? They've decided that human progress must end because of global warming. Unlike China, that says the answer to global warming is moving into the future. It's developing higher modes of technology, getting beyond fossil fuels, getting to higher modes that don't destroy the environment, right? There is a pessimistic oligarchy that rules the world. Big banks, big corporations, and they're fighting among themselves right now. There's one particular faction you can call the Eastern Establishment that the Rockefeller family is in with, the Council on Foreign Relations. They're tied in with British capital. George Soros is in there as well. That's one faction. There's another faction that's got Betsy DeVos and the folks that are all about military hardware and weapons manufacturers. There's Bernie Marcus, the owner of Home Depot. Sheldon Adelson. There's the Trump faction. They have their interests and their desires. The owners of Apple, right? Apple Corporation, they have a lot of influence. And even though they put out kind of a liberal perspective, we do know that the CEO of Apple and Donald Trump are very, very close. They very much like each other. There's also the Silicon Valley elite. Let's not forget the Silicon Valley elite. The tech giants, right? Eric Schmidt of Google, Bill Gates of Microsoft, right? Mark Zuckerberg, right? There's a lot of very, very powerful people. But for the most part, they share ultimately the same perspective, which is there are too many poor people in this world. There are too many working class people. We can't make a profit from their labor. What do we do about them? What do we do about them? What do we do about them? One faction says, let's manage them. Let's control them. Let's carefully try to have social peace. Another faction says, let's starve them. Austerity now. Drive their wages down. Free market capitalism. Woohoo! There's divisions among the rich and powerful right now because capitalism is in a crisis. This is a crisis of overproduction. This is capitalism. Capitalism functioning the way it always has. The capitalists are trying to maximize their profits and doing so by driving the conditions of the workers lower and lower. Technology has increased, and in a rational society, more technology would mean less work for everyone. But under capitalism, more technology and more abundance leads to greater poverty. This is all the natural workings of the capitalist system. But there are millions of working people around the world who don't want this any longer. Plus, there are many governments around the world that have broken out of this global system of monopoly capitalism, capitalism in its highest state. Many countries like Venezuela, like Iran, like Cuba, like North Korea, right? Like Russia, like China, like Vietnam, like Belarus, that have broken out of this global system of financial capitalism, this global system of monopoly, this global system of driving people into poverty to maximize profits for the billionaires and bankers. There are many countries around the world that have broken out of that system. Plus, there are many working class people who don't want to just be eliminated. They don't want to just be phased out of existence. They don't want to just be downsized. They want to fight for their survival. They want to fight for their jobs and their housing. They don't want to live in a giant low-wage prison. They want a better life for their kids, for their communities. They love their fellow human beings. That's the world that we live in. And that's the fight that is before us. And I hope that this opening presentation tonight has helped you to better understand what it is that I'm talking about when I talk about capitalism, when I talk about imperialism, when I talk about anti-imperialism, resistance, and socialism. Because this is what we're up against. This is how they go about ruling the world. Talk about the Oracle at Delphi, talk about the Roman Empire, or you can talk about the imperialists of today, the global Western monopoly capitalist system that is driving the world into poverty. But the potential for solidarity is bigger than ever because the people of Yemen are fighting back against the same system every day. The people of Venezuela are fighting back against the same system every day. And we, the people of the United States, that are seeing our jobs shipped overseas, they're seeing our country fall apart with roads that are not paved and water that's not properly purified, the younger generation that are stuck in a cycle of low-wage, short-term service sector jobs. We have the same enemy. Imperialism is the enemy of all humanity. And solidarity and brotherhood and comradeship is the way out of the disaster called imperialism.